lead. Yes.
You might ask him.
Yes.
Thank you for allowing me to step in.
Yeah.
I need a soundbite. But I wanted to ask you, when we think of a foreclosure crisis, which is what we've heard here at home for a lot of months, maybe a little more than a year now, we've heard about this. That's one thing, but what's happening now with the banks is a much, much bigger issue. I would ask you how a financial crisis of this magnitude affects our foreign policy necessarily.
I think in many different ways. There's some very specific ones because we already are somewhat beholden on some foreign money coming to bail us out, sovereign wealth funds and various things. We know that a lot of foreigners are investing in the United States, and we need that investment. So if we're not able to deal with this, it undermines confidence and then becomes kind of even more cyclical. So we need to deal with this so that we can, in fact, get the benefits of the interdependence. That's one part. The second part, though, goes to this whole issue of how people feel about America's role. And we want to, I am a person who believes that America's best days are ahead, that we aren't, there are all these, kind of woe is me stories about America. I don't buy that. But I think that we need to remain strong so that other countries will cooperate with us on this whole host of issues. So it's important to deal with this crisis. But it has a contagion effect. I mean, if you're reading every hour, there's some, this morning, for instance, I was looking at some things, there are problems in some of the European banks, there are some problems in other parts of the world, so it has this ripple effect, and it has effect generally on the international system. So it does have a foreign policy effect, first on whether people invest in us, and then second generally is how it rolls out. This is serious. This is very, very serious, and I think that it requires very careful thought. It's bad. There's no other way. The point is, and I thought Obama made a very interesting speech yesterday in terms of it's serious, but we shouldn't panic, I think, because that is something that feeds on itself.
It's a pleasure to see you back in Northeast Ohio. Thank you for coming. Regarding the situation in Darfur, I recently skimmed an article, and I apologize, I really only skimmed it. It was online, and I believe it was in The Nation, and it was suggesting that the current problems are more a result of a racialization that happened during the colonial period, much as what happened in the Hutu-Tutsi situation, and that current attempts at prosecution are more scapegoating than helpful, and I wonder if you had any comment on that.
Well, first of all, it's a complicated story. Sudan is a very complex country. It's very big. It has a variety of groups. This is not a black-white issue. This is an issue where it's actually the government in Khartoum are Muslims. The people that are being pushed out are some form of Arab Muslims. So this is not an issue where it's white colonialists or anything like that. Some of it has to do with lines that were drawn in different periods and dividing various tribes. But I think there are any number of things that are a problem here. One is that the government in Khartoum really did employ methods against the various farmers and people that lived in Darfur. The other, believe it or not, I just gave a long talk on this, is what's happened as a result of the environment. Because of desertification and the drying up of water sources, a lot of people have been pushed by the government forces out of various farmlands because the farmlands aren't producing the kind of thing that they need. The additional food crisis has added to that. So there are many, many aspects to this. I think, however, and there have been attempts to get the so-called rebels to negotiate. They are a little bit like an amoeba. They keep splitting into smaller and smaller groups, and then deciding one group does negotiate and then another group decides not to go along with it, and people have tried to figure out how to bring them all together. But the government in Khartoum has done some pretty hideous things in terms of sending the military in to move huge numbers of people out of where they live. The U.S. government has called it genocide, and there has been ethnic cleansing and moving, etc. So all that has happened. The argument is whether if Bashir, the leader of the government, is charged by the International Criminal Court of being a war criminal, whether that makes it harder for him to negotiate or not, or to get a solution. And we found the same thing in Yugoslavia, and people raised the issue. The bottom line is that Milosevic was prosecuted as a war criminal, Karadzic was prosecuted as a war criminal. It didn't stop there from being a Dayton Agreement. And the importance of doing something like this, and I believe in it, is that one of the problems when you have groups of people fighting each other in ethnic cleansing and genocide is you can't blame everybody in the country. And so what happens with a criminal prosecution like this is you assign individual guilt and expunge collective guilt, so that not everybody is responsible for the killings, the genocidal acts. But, you know, I don't happen to agree with the argument that he should not be tried. But what has to happen here is a much larger issue, and that is how to deliver humanitarian assistance into Darfur, how to get an international force into Darfur, and how to push on the negotiations. And Senator Obama has talked about the need to have a no-fly zone so that humanitarian goods can be dropped and delivered, and also to try to beef up this international force, to have the U.S. contribute more to the logistical parts of it so that the African Union can do the job. But it is a really, really tough issue. And there are arguments against every single thing that I've said. In terms of whether that it's wrong to do Bashir. There's some who think that the African Union can't do it. There's some who think that a no-fly zone is not a good idea, because then how do you figure out how to protect people? I mean, so it's one of the hardest issues. Sudan was hard before that. I had more meetings on Sudan than many others. But I can tell you this, the person that was my assistant secretary for this and is now Obama's leading advisor is Susan Rice, and I think there are very few people that really know that issue better than she does, so I have great confidence in.
I think we might, yeah. I was wondering, as the discussions about national security start to broaden so that it doesn't just encompass military defense, do you think that we'll see more women emerging on the scene as prominent leaders in national security discussions, and do you think that's important?
Well, bottom first, I do think it's important. I am not a believer that thinks that the world would be safer if every government was run by women. If you believe that, you have forgotten high school. But I do think that it is important to have women in a lot of high-level positions. And we know in any society, if women are politically and economically empowered, the societies are more stable. There are more young women going. I teach at Georgetown, and I was originally brought in, interestingly enough, in the 80s in order to get women interested in national security issues and how to really realize that it's a very good life and a very important one to have women involved in it. I do think that it's important to get more women in, and I think we'll see more and more women. And I think the skills of women negotiating, we're very good at that, consensus building, generally smart. But I have to tell you, people wondered if a woman could be Secretary of State because of the Arabs and various authoritarian societies. I had no problem with them. It did help. I arrived in a large plane that said United States of America. But I actually had more problems with the men in our own government. Not because they were all male chauvinist pigs, but because they had seen me rise through. I had been a carpool mother, a friend of their wife's, a staffer. I'd made a lot of coffee and Xeroxed a lot, and they wanted to be Secretary of State. So.